Hi there, I'm Eilis Slater. I'm the communications worker for Glasgow Women's Aid, and this is another episode of our web series looking at the dynamics of domestic abuse. And today we'll be looking at the types of domestic abuse in a little bit more detail, just to give you a better understanding. So last time we looked at what domestic abuse is and what the root cause of it is as well. So just to give you a bit of a recap, we looked at how men have more power in society due to traditional stereotypes being played out, such as women having more domestic roles, and from what we see of the portrayal of women in the television and the media compared to men. And also how these stereotypes then promote aggressive behaviour and cause somewhat of a toxic environment, which is then normalised by the media and these stereotypes. And then this can lead to a desire for control, which then can lead to abusive behaviour. And we also looked at how, alcohol and mental health may be triggers for this, but are not the root cause of domestic abuse. So just to go into what we're going to be looking at now, we'll look at the different types of domestic abuse, just to give you a bit of a background into what these are and how expansive they are as well. So the first type we'll look at is emotional abuse. This is something that can be subtle and not really obvious at the beginning of the relationship or the interaction. This can be name-calling, criticism, threats, being put down in front of other people. Maybe comments about weight or appearance can also come into play here as another form of control. After this, we'll look at physical. So this can be, hitting, it can be threats of violence, threats with weapons, which can in some cases lead to death, unfortunately. But also, physical abuse, it can have early signs of aggressive behaviour that isn't actually directed towards the victim survivor themselves at first. So this may include, punching walls or breaking maybe a sentimental item of the partner or ex-partner. So that can really come into play as well. Sexual abuse is mostly committed by someone that the victim survivor actually knows. So this can be a partner or an ex-partner, for instance. It's really important to kind of keep that in mind when we're discussing these issues. So it can be rape, assault. It can also be being forced to imitate acts that have been seen in pornography to degrade the person. It can include forced unprotected sex and also intimate image abuse, which you may have heard before as revenge porn. And this is something that is a crime. It's the sharing or publishing of intimate images without the consent of the other person. And this is designed to embarrass or shame the person in order to exert that control. Financial abuse is a way for the perpetrator to control their partner or ex-partner. Our finances are really important in order for us to go out and have a social life, to put food on the table, to maybe get things for our children that we might need. So this sort of abuse is something that can go quite unnoticed. For instance, money may be withheld from the victim survivor. They may not have control over their own finances. The perpetrator may purposefully cause them to have a poor credit rating. They may be forced to make fraudulent benefit claims on behalf of the perpetrator. They may have to account for spent money. They may have to bring back receipts after they've done a grocery shop. They may have to ask permission from the perpetrator for a certain amount of money for whatever they need to get that week. They may not even have their own bank account. There's a lot of people who go into maybe a decent paid job, but they don't actually have it going into their own bank account. It goes into the perpetrator's bank account. So this is something that can be really hard to notice, and it is another form of control. So you may have heard the term coercive control before. This is something that is now recognised as a crime in Scotland, and it is a type of abuse that is just as harmful as any other type of abuse that we have just discussed. So in case you don't know what it is, coercive control is a pattern of deliberate abuse over time, leaving the victim survivor intimidated, dependent, and isolated. So it can start as small acts of abuse in order to take away the self-esteem of the victim survivor. So this can be comments on, weight or appearance, maybe controlling who that person can see, in order to sort of get that person to be completely subservient to the perpetrator. So it can include things like isolating the person from their friends and their family, degrading words towards them, and mind games as well. So this can be anything to do with, regulating their everyday life, monitoring phone calls, controlling what they wear. And they may phrase it in a way that comes off a bit more positive, such as, why don't you wear what I bought you? I think that looks really good on you. And that's a really sort of sneaky way that it can be manipulated into controlling that victim survivor. So these rules made by the perpetrator tend to be based on the stereotypes of how they think a partner should behave. So maybe how they cook, how they keep their house, how they parent, and maybe even how they perform sexually as well. Now, modern technology has unfortunately made it easier for the abuser so that they can monitor and control their partner or their ex-partner's movements, even when they're not present. So this can include, being able to text and phone them whenever they'd like, location apps on smartphones, being able to kind of keep track of where they are and where they're going. Also, smart devices such as doorbells that you can get now, which show who's coming in and out of the home, and even heating and lighting. The perpetrator might be able to control these to make the victim survivor uncomfortable in their own home. So when speaking to a lot of people who have experienced coercive control, there has been this common consensus that the worst part about this type of abuse is that the abuser changes the rules and is constantly shifting the goalposts, so to speak. You may have learnt to cope with the set rules that are in place by the perpetrator, but then suddenly those can change really quickly. And life ends up becoming this constant walking on eggshells. Physical abuse may not come into a domestic abuse situation. This is because the perpetrator may not ever need to use physical abuse in order to exert that power and control over the victim survivor. But it's important to note that even if someone hasn't experienced any physical abuse in the relationship, the most dangerous time is leaving that relationship or trying to regain more control back into your life. This is when, even if you haven't experienced that physical abuse, this is when the abuse can become more severe and it can increase and it can become physical. And sadly, the risk of murder is actually higher in these cases. So it's really important to note this when we're discussing the dynamics of domestic abuse. We wanted to bring this web series to you to raise awareness and reduce stigma of domestic abuse during what is a time of increased risk for victim survivors right now. If you have been affected by domestic abuse and you'd like to speak to somebody, our helpline is open Monday to Friday, 10 till 4, and we also have email support for you as well. And we'll be listing that along with some other support services that you might find useful below this video. Thank you so much for watching, and next time we'll be looking at the impact and trauma of domestic abuse. Hope you're staying safe and well during these challenging times.